Hello, everybody. What incredible energy in this room and at this conference, right? I was so impressed seeing you all stand up and dance, and thank you to you all for being here and engaging and being part of accelerating solutions to the climate crisis. One aspect of the climate crisis we don't talk so much about is how to apply social sciences, communication science, behavioral science to actually seeing some of these tools, technologies, and advances actually reach commercial viability and actually be accepted by the public, and then have the policymakers then that refrain we always hear, is there the political will to see through solutions to the climate crisis? Well, I'm telling you, if we apply behavioral science and communication science, we will see through these real advances in solving the climate crisis into reality. We will find that political will. So that's what I'm going to get into in this talk today. And so what we have that we all here collectively know is a planet that is unfortunately on fire. If you don't know, all you have to do is turn on the radio, turn on the television, and it's clear. There's hurricanes in the Western Hemisphere. They're called typhoons in Asia. We have wildfires in the Western United States and Australia. We are living in the real impacts of climate change now. And scientists have known this for decades, but really struggled with communicating this reality. It's why we find ourselves so woefully unprepared today. We should have done some of the things we've been talking about yesterday, right? But we are only just starting now. The reason for this is because until we were in this collective lived reality of climate change impacts, it was hard for us to process that these risks were actually serious. Climate change impacts decades ago were still seen as impacts that were far in the future, slow moving, issues that those were dealing with over there, not something we had to worry about over here. This was true pretty much for anyone, anywhere, except those who were the most vulnerable to impacts of climate. And that's not the case anymore. We're living in the real impacts of climate. And yet, there is still this disconnect between what we know to be true, because we're seeing it when we turn on the television, and our preparations for our communities, for our companies, for our families. We're still not preparing ourselves. There's still a disconnect. What is this? Why is this happening? I'm going to answer that with this lamp. And I promise you there's a connection here. So I'm going to ask you all from a show of hands, consider this situation. There's a lamp you really want to buy. Next door, and it looks better than this, next door, this lamp is $40. Across town, you can buy this lamp for $20. How many of you, and don't be smart and say, how are you getting there? Are there carbon emissions because you're taking, a gas-fueled cart? Don't ask me any of that. How many of you would make the effort to go across town to buy this lamp for half off, $20 off? Raise your hand if the answer is yes to that. Okay, second scenario. There is a new electric car. You're really excited. Oh my gosh, I actually know so little about cars, I don't actually know where you go to buy a car. So there's a car, there's a dealer next door, and it's selling the car for $25,000. You find out there's a dealer across town that is selling the car for $24,980. Do you make the effort to go across town to buy that car for $20 off? How many of you would make the effort to go across town? Raise your hands. Okay. Very few of you participated in this, so we're doing this in a few slides. So I'm going to ask everyone to raise their hands for the next example. But think it through. How many of you made the same decision? How many of you switched your decision when I switched the actual example from a lamp to a car? Most people switch their decision. Most people will make the effort to go across town for the lamp, but would not do the same thing for the car. Even though it's $20, it's the same $20. But the reality is that just changing the framing, changing the numerical value around the actual $20 will change your behavioral outcome. And this is how human beings are predictably irrational. And it's what marketers and advertisers use for us all the time. And fine, we know this. We know that we are being taken advantage of based on understanding of the quirks of our brains, right? It's not a big deal if it's just marketing and you lose out on 20. It's a big deal when it actually has implications for us adapting to the real impacts of climate, to staving off worser case warming scenarios. That's when the quirks of our brains can really mess us up. And that's why it's so important for us to understand how our perceptions, how these context cues and framing effects lead to predictable, behavioral, irrational outcomes. So this is something that we know to be true. And this is something that has actually worked out for us pretty well for the most part, right? Because we know from the dawn of our species, our ancestors would have been were able to use the designing of our brains to react to risks around them. They would see a poisonous snake and they would jumpstart the response system to run away. And this worked out well. We're probably not related to anyone that didn't respond and react to the snake and run away, right? So we're glad that we have this, what we call system one processing in our brains. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman refers to this as system one processing. It's the idea that we do very simple risk analyses to be able to make a decision and move with it. We don't have time to analyze all of the different cues before we actually decide to cross a street or to respond to a snake or to catch a ball in the air, for example. So it's good that we have this processing. But the risk landscape around us has changed since that of our ancestors. We find ourselves in a complex, interconnected, global risk environment, and we need to override that innate wiring to be able to thoughtfully and carefully come up with the proactive preparedness strategies to protect us against what we know is a warming planet. So because of this should have been in some colors, so I'm sorry you can't see the colors. But because of this is why we overestimate certain risks, like plane crashes, and we underestimate certain risks like heat, like sea level rise. Let me ask you this. What is more likely to kill you? Shark attacks, and I want everyone to participate, or radon gas? How many of you say shark attacks? Okay, you're all getting clued into what I'm doing here. That's what's going on. This has been a few slides coming. And then how many of you say radon gas? All right, well, we're also in a part of the country that knows about radon gas. You should see how this works in New York City, I promise you. And so what we have is, the reality is that shark attacks kill in the single digits globally. Radon gas kills 20,000 just Americans alone, and is the second leading cause of lung cancer. Try this on your families and friends. Try this on social media even. See how many people say shark attacks. And it's because these types of risks are sensationalized. They are easy to recall. These are risks that are considered very they're sexy, which is not the best word to describe it, but they're the way that the media likes to catch people's attention and get headlines. And because they're easier to recall, we attribute more frequency and probability to the likelihood of them occurring. So you can see the flip side of that, why something like sea level rise or heat doesn't get the attention cognitively for us that it deserves. So we get this wrong because of things like how easily we can recall a risk. We get this from whether or not we can see a risk, right? All of that influences our perceptions. We are most influenced by trust, how much we trust who the person communicating about the risk is, how much we trust that person. So knowing that all of these different factors are triggers for how we cognitively assess risk, we actually are more empowered now. This is not a bad thing. The fact that our brains play these tricks on us is actually super helpful, because now we have the knowledge to overcome these quirks of our brains. We are in a dual crisis. We are in a climate crisis. We are in a communications crisis. For us to solve the communications crisis, we need to acknowledge and recognize that we fall prey to the biases of the context in which we operate. We are influenced by things outside of the actual decision at hand. And knowing this knowledge will make us that much better at communicating and closing that gap between the perception, or rather things not being so scary because we can't see it, or it's far in the future, and the reality of what we're facing and what we have to do to proactively prepare to ensure that we are setting ourselves up to adapt to a world that is warmer and to make sure that those increasingly warmer scenarios never come into existence. So I charge you to actually take the time to challenge the perceptions that arise. Think through why you are overreacting or overestimating versus underreacting or underestimating the actual base rate statistics of various issues that come up in your day-to-day, in your work, in the as it relates to climate change. And charge your family and friends with this too. Find out how well calibrated you are. Do the research. Look it up. Actually look up the base rate statistics. Maybe you happen to know about shark attacks, but if you don't, look it up. Do your due diligence and close that gap between your perception and your reality. If we begin to transform ourselves as individuals, we can be that much more effective in our companies, help companies internally, across the value chain, across sectors, across society, and really encourage this widespread behavioral change that aligns to the reality of the risks we're facing, that aligns to the science and the evidence and the facts. And what will that bring on? Political will. The policymakers will be that much more receptive to push through policies that are aligned to the reality of what we're facing if they know they have the backing of the public, the backing of society. So this is really important that we take the time to do it. It's the missing piece of the puzzle. This is what I really hope that you will take away from this talk. Recognize that we are really infallible, have compassion, because we all are wired this way, regardless of where you are in the world. We all have this innate wiring of our brains, but we can overcome it by thoughtfully taking the time to think through how we close that perception and reality gap. Become better calibrated, charge your friends and families to do the same, and a tool that we've developed, a technology which I'm a big fan of, but again, we need the social sciences. Don't stop leaving out us social scientists. We need the behavioral scientists. We need the communication scientists. But download this technology. It's called We Don't Have Time. It's an app that will immediately connect you, and you can begin communicating and sharing what you learned here today. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen and for engaging with these activities. Thank you.